Here in Chapter 5, we will be learning about metabolism and looking at cellular respiration. To begin with, let's look at definition of what metabolism is. And this is all of the reactions in the body that are required for energy transfer. And so divided into two different categories. So the first is anabolism. And so anabolic reactions, these require energy to synthesize large molecules. All right, so with anabolism, so you're going from small to large. Okay, so this would, an example would be going from a monosaccharide to a polysaccharide, or with proteins, going from a monopeptide to a polypeptide. Catabolism is the opposite, where now we're releasing energy to break down large molecules into small. So catabolic reactions go from large to small. Example of this would be with carbohydrates. So going from a polysaccharide and going to, say, glucose, a monosaccharide, okay, so that we can use that for later energy. So anabolic reactions, you're building up. Catabolic, you're breaking down. Again, just like we've seen before, both reactions are occurring all the time within the body. So in order for us to have catabolism of glucose, that requires oxygen as the final electron acceptor. Okay, and so this is called aerobic cellular respiration. Breaking down of glucose requires many steps, and the first of which are anaerobic, and this is the first topic that we'll cover with glycolysis. Now, in order for us to break down, then we are able to build things back up later on. So a little in preview, aerobic cellular respiration. This has many oxidation reduction reactions, and the final electron acceptor is always oxygen, okay? So that is something to really understand and to be familiar with. So with cellular respiration, we have three different stages. The first is glycolysis. The second is the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. And the last is the electron transport chain. So glycolysis occurs within the cytoplasm, and it does not need oxygen or mitochondria. The citric acid cycle occurs only in the matrix of the mitochondria, and then the electron transport chain is on the cristae of the mitochondria of the inner membrane. Again, those were those inner folds that we had within the mitochondria, and so that's to increase surface area. So the product that we get out of one glucose molecule, when we talk about a catabolic reaction, is breaking down. So we'll have glucose plus oxygen is going to yield 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and then the big thing is ATP that we'll use later for energy to help drive then anabolic reactions to help build things up. The glucose that we get for us to use as energy comes from the digestive tract as well as from the liver where it's stored, and then also from blood plasma. Then glucose will travel into the cell cytoplasm, where then it can start the breakdown process. And so the first stage again is glycolysis, and so this is for metabolism, and then it can enter then the byproducts into citric acid cycle in the mitochondria, and so this is for aerobic conditions. All right, so let's begin by looking over glycolysis. And so glycolysis, again, is the first step in catabolism. So now, again, breakdown of sugars, of glucose. And so glucose is split into 2 pyruvic acid molecules. So we have a 6-carbon sugar. It's broken down into 2 molecules of a 3-carbon pyruvic acid. And so we go from C6H12O6 to 2 molecules of C3H4O3. And so there's many enzymatic steps that are involved, and hydrogens are also removed as intermediates in glycolysis, where each hydrogen pair donates 2 electrons to NAD. So here, though, we're losing a total of 4 hydrogen ions, okay? So in this example, 4 hydrogen ions are being lost, okay? And so NAD is going to be one of the reactants that will help in the formation of glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis, there are going to be 10 different reactions that occur to break down into these 2 pyruvic molecules. And since oxygen is not needed, this is considered to be an anaerobic process. Also, in glycolysis, this is the only area or a process that can occur within red blood cells because red blood cells do not have any other organelle. And so what we have then is, again, one glucose molecule is going to make 2 pyruvic acids, and then we'll have formation of 2 ATP that are produced. Okay, and this is true for any cell that undergoes glycolysis, where the net result is 2 ATP. So when we look at energy gains for glycolysis, we actually have 4 ATP that are produced. However, we need to put in 2 to get the process started for ADP and PI, which will yield a total of 2 ATP. So glucose requires the activation at the beginning provided by this inorganic phosphate with the 2 ATP or ADP molecules. And so what that does is it phosphorylates glucose so that it cannot diffuse back through the plasma membrane. So a question for you is, since we have a production of ATP, is glycolysis an endergonic reaction or an exergonic reaction? And so it is, in fact, an exergonic reaction because we have released energy in the form of ATP. When there is no oxygen to complete the breakdown of glucose, then we undergo what is known as the lactic acid pathway. And so these still are going to be considered anaerobic conditions because oxygen, again, is not there. So instead, what we have is that NADH is going to give its electrons to pyruvic acid. And so NADH then is going to become oxidized into NAD. So the big difference here is that the last electron acceptor is going to be an organic molecule, not oxygen. And so a cell can survive without oxygen as long as it can produce enough energy for its needs. And lactic acid concentration isn't too high. So when we go through this process, so pyruvic acid plus this NADH is going to yield then lactic acid, okay? And as you can imagine, acid is going to formulate then a byproduct of hydrogens, okay? And so that's going to lower the pH over time. So muscle cells can survive for a while without oxygen by using lactic acid fermentation. However, when we have a high concentration of lactic acid within muscles, this is why we have a lot of that burning sensation, and it's due to the accumulation of those acids. So regardless though, if we undergo this fermentation pathway, we still have our net gain of 2 ATP that we had with glycolysis. And so you can imagine too, over time though, in terms of like running a marathon, we need to have oxygen in order to generate more ATP for the demands for that organ.